Elizabeth I is one of England's greatest monarchs, perhaps the greatest. She firmly established England as a Protestant nation, defeated the Spanish Armada, and fostered a cultural renaissance, ushering in what became known as the Elizabethan Golden Age. But she had a very difficult childhood and was fortunate to make it to the throne at all. When she was young, her father Henry VIII executed her mother Anne Boleyn. She was stripped of her inheritance, declared illegitimate, and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. Elizabeth was born to King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Henry had married Anne out of deep affection, believing she would finally provide the male heir he had long desired, something his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had not. From that earlier marriage, he had only one surviving child, Princess Mary. However, Henry's hopes for a male heir were quickly dashed. To his bitter disappointment, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Princess Elizabeth, in September 1533. So certain was the king that the child would be a boy that the word prince on the official birth announcement had to be hastily amended to princess. King Henry was torn between anger and disappointment at the birth of his daughter. Desperate for a male heir to secure the future of the Tudor dynasty, he viewed Elizabeth's arrival as a profound letdown. Nevertheless, the newborn princess was given a lavish christening. The ceremony took place in the chapel of the Observant Friars, with Thomas Cranmer standing as her godfather and the Duchess of Norfolk as her godmother. Notably, King Henry himself did not attend. When Elizabeth was just 3 months old, she was sent to Hatfield, where she was placed in her own private household. There, a dedicated staff of nurses, courtiers, and tutors oversaw her care and early education. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, visited only occasionally. Tragically, when Elizabeth was only 2 years old, Anne was arrested on charges of adultery and executed on the orders of her own husband, King Henry. Anne Boleyn's downfall had profound and painful consequences for Elizabeth. Stripped of her royal title, declared illegitimate, and removed from the line of succession, the young princess's status was abruptly shattered. Her childhood became overshadowed by the looming presence of a father known for his cruelty and unpredictability. More than once, she faced an uncertain future with a heavy heart, unsure of what fate might await her. Lady Bryan, Elizabeth's devoted governess, did all she could to shield the young princess from the trauma surrounding her mother's execution. Meanwhile, King Henry had shifted his attention to his new wife, Jane Seymour, who would soon give birth to the long-awaited male heir, Prince Edward. As a result, Elizabeth began to experience increasing neglect. Eventually, Lady Bryan was compelled to write to Secretary Thomas Cromwell, pleading for assistance. She reported that Elizabeth had outgrown her infant clothing, there were no funds to provide for her properly, and no clear instructions on how the princess was to be raised. Fortunately, Jane Seymour proved to be a kind and compassionate stepmother. She took steps to ensure Elizabeth's basic needs were met, and even made efforts to mend the fractured relationship between Henry and his daughter. However, the king remained emotionally distant and largely unmoved. During this time, Elizabeth continued to live at Hatfield House, visiting the royal court only on rare occasions. Despite being officially declared illegitimate, Elizabeth's status did not prevent her from receiving an exceptional education. She flourished under the instruction of prominent humanist scholars such as Roger Ascham and John Check. In 1548, Ascham would write that Elizabeth's mind showed no womanly weakness and that her dedication and perseverance matched, if not exceeded, that of any man. Tragically, just 2 weeks after giving birth to Prince Edward, Jane Seymour died, leaving Elizabeth motherless once again. Henry soon married Anne of Cleves, but the union ended in divorce after only a few weeks. Shortly afterward, he wed his fifth wife, Catherine Howard, whose fate eerily echoed that of Anne Boleyn. Her execution left a deep and lasting impression on the 9-year-old Elizabeth. This traumatic event likely shaped Elizabeth's views on love and marriage. She would never marry, eventually earning the enduring title of the Virgin Queen. Henry's sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr, developed a warm and affectionate relationship with Elizabeth. For years, she treated the young princess with kindness and respect, offering the stability and support Elizabeth had long been denied. Catherine also played a pivotal role in persuading the king to pursue a lasting reconciliation with his daughter, helping to restore Elizabeth's position within the royal family. Elizabeth was once again included in the line of succession and brought back to the royal court. With her father's fiery red hair and her mother's dark, expressive eyes, she quickly became a striking and intelligent presence. During this formative period, Queen Catherine Parr had a strong and positive influence on her. She nurtured Elizabeth's love of learning and played a key role in introducing her to the ideas of the Protestant Reformation, shaping both her intellect and her emerging worldview. Even after Henry's death in 1547, this intellectually rich and relatively happy chapter of Elizabeth's life continued. She was welcomed into the household of Catherine Parr at Sudeley Castle, where the Dowager Queen lived with her new husband, husband, Thomas Seymour. However, scandal soon followed. Elizabeth was caught in a compromising situation with Seymour, and as a result, she was banished from the household. She was sent back to the Cheshire estate in Hertfordshire, where she resumed her studies under the guidance of Roger Ascham. Elizabeth developed a deep admiration for Ascham and would cherish his mentorship for the rest of her life. In 1548, Catherine Parr died shortly after giving birth, and not long afterward, Thomas Seymour was arrested and executed for conspiring to marry Elizabeth and abduct the young King Edward VI. Suspicion quickly fell on Elizabeth, prompting the king to launch an investigation into her possible involvement. During questioning, she admitted only to being aware of Seymour's ambitions, but firmly denied ever encouraging him. Robert Tyrwhitt, the official assigned to interrogate her, remained unconvinced, noting, "I do see it in her face that she is guilty." It was during this ordeal that Elizabeth learned a critical lesson. To survive the dangerous and ever-shifting politics of Tudor England, she would have to master the art of concealing her true thoughts. Following this series of tragic events, her half-brother Edward, then the rightful heir, ascended to the throne in 1547. Elizabeth maintained a cordial relationship with him and was later invited to return to court. On July 6, 1553, Elizabeth was stunned by the sudden death of King Edward VI. In the days that followed, she joined her older sister Mary in a symbolic ride into London to celebrate Mary's accession to the throne. Yet the outward display of sisterly unity was short-lived. Mary's controversial decision to marry Philip II of Spain and her zealous efforts to restore England to the Roman Catholic Church sparked widespread unrest and growing anxiety, both within the royal court and across the country. Elizabeth soon found herself at the center of treasonous plots against her sister, Queen Mary. One of the most serious was Thomas Wyatt's rebellion in 1554. Centered in Kent, the uprising was primarily aimed at preventing Mary's unpopular marriage to Philip of Spain. However, there is compelling evidence to suggest that Wyatt's ambitions may have gone further, perhaps even to overthrow the Queen and place Elizabeth on the throne. Although the captured rebels provided no concrete evidence linking Elizabeth to the plot, suspicion clung to her. Queen Mary, convinced of her sister's guilt, was determined to see her punished, perhaps even executed. However, members of the Privy Council intervened, and Elizabeth's life was spared. Still, she was imprisoned in the Tower of London, a place heavy with personal and political symbolism, for it was within those very walls that her mother, Anne Boleyn, had spent her final days before facing the executioner's blade. Though her imprisonment was relatively comfortable in physical terms, the emotional toll was profound. Meanwhile, public dissatisfaction with Queen Mary's reign continued to grow. Many in England resented her marriage to Philip II of Spain, a powerful Habsburg prince who spent little time in the country and showed limited interest in his English queen. The union produced no heirs, deepening Mary's sense of isolation. Her harsh persecution of Protestants earned her the enduring nickname Bloody Mary, and she was ultimately left both childless and grief-stricken. By 1558, Mary's health had deteriorated significantly. Though her advisors urged her to name Elizabeth as her successor, Mary hesitated, fully aware that her Protestant half-sister would likely reverse her hard-fought efforts to restore Catholicism in England. Yet as death approached and no other viable heir remained, Mary finally relented. With reluctant acceptance, she named Elizabeth her successor. 3 days after Mary's death, Elizabeth convened her first council. In a heartfelt address, she expressed gratitude to those who had stood by her during the long years of uncertainty and disgrace. She quickly began shaping her inner circle, appointing trusted allies to key positions. In November 1558, the 25-year-old Elizabeth entered London to the cheers of jubilant crowds. Her ascension marked not just the rise of a new monarch, but the dawn of a new era in English history. Elizabeth would go on to rule England for 45 years, an era now remembered as the Golden Age. Under her leadership, England experienced peace, cultural flourishing, and growing influence on the world stage. As the last Tudor monarch, Elizabeth elevated her kingdom into a major global power and left behind a legacy that endures to this day.